The land beyond the mountains had known peace for many years, but that peace was breaking apart. In the far kingdom of Ralford, dark banners rose on the horizon. The enemy was ruthless, burning villages and cutting down anyone who stood in their way. The people were terrified, and the king's soldiers could not hold the line much longer. In the grand hall of the kingdom, a council of lords gathered. Their voices were loud, their faces full of fear. They knew they needed help from beyond their borders. A messenger was sent to carry their plea to every friendly realm. They asked for the bravest, the most noble, the heroes who could save them from destruction. The message traveled far until it reached the stone halls of Earth's ruling palace. Queen Margaret sat on her high seat, listening as her advisors read the desperate words. She was a woman known for her strong will and sharp mind. Her crown was heavy, but her heart was steady. She did not believe in sending gentle champions to fight a brutal enemy. She believed in sending the kind of people who could crush that enemy without mercy. She called for her commanders. In the torchlit war room, maps were spread across the table. Margaret spoke in a calm but firm voice. She would not send knights in shining armor. She would send her most dangerous warriors, the ones forged in the fires of Earth's hardest battles. Jack was the first she called. He was a massive man with scars across his arms and a stare that could freeze the blood of any foe. His strength was unmatched, and his hands knew the weight of war. Next was Claire, a woman with a sharp mind for strategy. She had turned losing battles into victories before, and she knew how to see weakness where others saw strength. Ethan came after. He spoke little, but his skill with a rifle was known across the lands. His aim never wavered, and his eyes missed nothing. Last was Lily, a medic who had seen more blood than most soldiers. She was quick, steady, and refused to let the wounded fall. When the four stood before her, Queen Margaret told them of the kingdom's need. She told them that they were not being sent as heroes to inspire songs. They were being sent as weapons to end a threat. Each of them understood, for they had never been called heroes in their own land. They were survivors, fighters, and they carried the weight of many battles behind their eyes. They prepared for the journey at once. Armor was mended, weapons sharpened, and supplies packed. The ship that would carry them to Ralford was ready at the docks, its sails black against the gray sky. Word spread quickly through the streets. People whispered about the Queen's choice. Some said she was wise. Others said she was sending monsters instead of protectors. The warriors did not care what the people thought. They boarded the ship in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The sea was rough, and the wind carried the scent of rain. Days passed with nothing but the crash of waves and the cry of gulls. At night, they sat around a small fire on the deck, speaking little. There was no need for many words between them. They all knew what was waiting. When at last they saw the coastline of Ralford, the sky was heavy with clouds. In the harbor, soldiers waited to meet them. The men and women of Ralford stood in rows, staring as the strangers stepped onto the shore. Jack's sighs alone made them step back. Claire's cold eyes swept over them as if weighing their worth. Ethan carried his rifle with the ease of a man who had lived with it all his life. Lily's calm gaze held no fear. Behind them, the banners of Ralford fluttered weakly in the wind. The air was thick with tension. These were not the shining heroes the people had imagined. These were something else, something harder, something dangerous. In the distance, smoke rose from a village recently attacked. The enemy was close, and the new arrivals knew there would be no time for rest. They had come for one reason only, to end the war, no matter the cost. The Earth Warriors walked through the streets of Ralford's capital, their boots heavy on the cobblestones. People leaned out of doorways and stood by market stalls, staring. Some eyes held curiosity, others fear. Children clung to their mothers and whispered to each other. These were not the saviors they had dreamed of. They were rough, scarred, and silent. The king had sent his captain to guide them to the barracks. The captain walked quickly, glancing over his shoulder more than once. He had fought for many years, but the presence of these strangers made him uneasy. Jack towered over everyone, his steps slow and deliberate. Claire walked with her arms crossed, studying the layout of the streets and walls. Ethan moved like a shadow, always watching, his rifle strapped across his back. Lily carried her medical satchel, her eyes scanning the crowd, not for danger, but for signs of sickness or injury. When they reached the training grounds, the king's soldiers were already there. Swords clanged as they sparred, but their movement stopped when they saw the newcomers. The captain introduced them with little enthusiasm, calling them warriors from a distant land. No titles, no songs, no speeches. Jack stepped forward without a word. He picked up a wooden training sword from a rack and motioned to the largest soldier on the field. The man, broad-shouldered and strong, stepped forward, smirking. The fight began with the clang of wood, but it was over in seconds. Jack disarmed him with one strike, then sent him to the ground with another. The watching soldiers fell silent. Jack dropped the training sword and walked away without a glance. Claire asked for a map of the kingdom's defenses. The captain hesitated, but she took it from him and spread it on a table. Her finger traced the lines of the walls, the roads, and the rivers. She pointed out weak spots in the defenses that no one had spoken of. She explained how the enemy could strike and how they could be trapped. Her voice was cold, her logic sharp. The captain listened, his pride stung, but he could not deny she was right. Ethan climbed the watchtower, scanned the distant hills through his scope, noting movement others had missed. His quiet report to the captain was simple. The enemy scouts were closer than they thought. The captain hurried to pass the warning to his men. Lily walked among the soldiers, checking their wounds and their supplies. She scolded them for dull blades and dirty bandages. She worked fast, her hands steady, her words direct. The soldiers began to see that while she was not gentle, she knew how to keep them alive. That night, the Earth Warriors ate at a long table with the king's soldiers. The room was filled with the smell of bread and stew. Conversation was low and tense. Some soldiers muttered that these strangers were too rough, too strange. But others admitted, in quiet voices, that they had never seen such skill. Outside, rain began to fall. The streets glistened under the torchlight. Claire sat by a window, watching the water run between the stones. Jack sharpened his blade, the sound scraping through the quiet room. Ethan cleaned his rifle in the corner. Lily packed fresh bandages into her satchel. The captain entered, his face pale. A village on the eastern road had been attacked. Survivors were fleeing toward the city. The enemy was moving faster than expected. Without a word, the Earth Warriors rose from their seats. There was no need for orders. They were already heading for the door. The city gates opened, and they rode out into the rain. The night was cold, the road slick with mud. The smell of smoke grew stronger with every mile. In the distance, flames lit the dark sky. Jack urged his horse forward, Claire riding close behind. Ethan scanned the road ahead, his rifle ready. Lily checked her supplies one last time. When they reached the village, the scene was grim. Houses burned, and the air was thick with ash. The few defenders left were struggling to hold back the raiders. Without hesitation, Jack leaped from his horse, swinging his sword with deadly force. Claire shouted orders, directing the defenders into stronger positions. Ethan took high ground, his shots cutting through the chaos. Lily pulled the wounded to safety, working even as arrows fell around her. By the time the sun began to rise, the enemy was gone, leaving their dead behind. The defenders looked at the Earth Warriors with new eyes. They were not gentle heroes, but they had saved lives. For the first time, the soldiers of Ralford began to wonder if perhaps their kingdom had been given exactly what it needed. The attack on the eastern village had shown the enemy's boldness. It also showed the people of Ralford what the Earth Warriors could do. Still, fear lingered in the city. The enemy was out there, moving through the forests and fields, and no one knew where they would strike next. The days that followed were tense. The Earth Warriors stayed busy. Jack trained the city's soldiers in close combat. His lessons were hard, and often left men on the ground, but each time they got back up stronger. Claire worked with the king's tacticians, changing patrol routes and reinforcing weak walls. Ethan spent long hours in the watchtowers, studying the land for any sign of movement. Lily worked in the infirmary, teaching the healers how to treat battlefield wounds faster and more effectively. Some of the soldiers began to admire them. Others still whispered that these were not heroes, but something far more dangerous. The whispers didn't bother the Earth Warriors. They had not come for praise. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, a breathless scout ran through the gates. The enemy had struck again, this time at a small fort on the riverbank. The defenders were outnumbered and would not last long without help. The captain of the guard turned to the Earth Warriors without hesitation. They left the city within minutes. The road to the fort was rough, winding through dense forest. The air was heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. Jack led the way, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. Claire rode beside him, already planning their approach. Ethan's eyes scanned every shadow, and Lily kept close, ready for what was to come. As they neared the fort, they heard the clash of steel and the shouts of men. Smoke curled above the trees. Claire ordered them to stop. She moved quickly up a small hill, using the height to study the battlefield. The fort's gates were splintered, defenders fighting desperately to keep the enemy from pouring in. Jack tightened his grip on his sword. Claire pointed to a weak flank in the enemy line and gave her orders. Jack and a group of soldiers would smash through it to draw attention. Ethan would take position on the wall for covering fire. Lily would stay near the gate to tend to the wounded. The moment they moved, the plan came alive. Jack charged with a roar, his strikes breaking through shields and armor. The enemy, startled by his strength, shifted to meet him. Ethan's shots rang out, precise and deadly, dropping those who tried to outflank the defenders. Claire moved through the chaos, guiding soldiers to hold their ground. Lily worked in the mud beside the gate, her hands red but steady as she kept men alive. The fight dragged on into the night. The enemy pressed hard, but the fort's defenders, fueled by the Earth Warriors' fierce presence, refused to fall. Jack fought like a man possessed, every blow pushing the enemy back. Ethan never missed. Claire's voice cut through the noise, her orders turning scattered defense into coordinated resistance. Lily did not stop for a moment, even when her arms ached and her knees were soaked in blood and rain. At last, the enemy broke. They fell back into the trees, leaving their dead behind. The fort was scarred and smoking, but it still stood. The defenders, panting and bloodied, looked around in disbelief. They had survived. The captain of the fort approached the Earth Warriors. His voice was rough, but his words carried respect. Without them, he said, the fort would have been lost before nightfall. Jack only nodded. Claire rolled up the map she had been studying. Ethan cleaned his rifle and Lily wiped her hands. They stayed the night at the fort, taking turns on watch. The forest beyond the walls was silent, but they knew the enemy was still out there. The fight was far from over. By morning, the news had reached the capital. Word spread quickly through the streets. Some called them saviors now, others still called them beasts. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. The only thing certain was that they were changing the war, and the people of Ralford were starting to see it. The weeks after the fort's defense were restless. The enemy did not vanish. Scouts reported movement in the hills and strange fires seen at night. The people of Ralford knew a larger attack was coming. King ordered every soldier to prepare for battle. Earth Warriors trained harder, pushing the soldiers beyond what they thought they could endure. Jack led the drills with unyielding force. He made the men fight in the rain and the mud until their arms ached and their legs shook. Claire worked in the war room, her eyes locked on maps, planning for the strike she knew was near. Ethan checked every high point around the city, marking positions for sharpshooters. Lily stocked the infirmary, gathering every scrap of cloth, herb, and clean water she could find. One night, the watch bells rang. Torches blazed along the walls. The enemy was coming in numbers greater than before. Their march shook the ground. From the battlements, the defenders could see a tide of soldiers stretching far into the darkness. Queen Margaret arrived that night, riding at the head of her personal guard. She wore dark armor and carried herself like a commander who feared nothing. Her presence lit a spark in the hearts of those who saw her. She met with the king and his council, but her focus was on her warriors. She asked for their plan, and Claire laid it out. The strategy was simple, but deadly. They would lure the enemy into a narrow valley just outside the city walls. The terrain there would turn the enemy's numbers against them. Jack would lead the charge to close the trap. Ethan would pick off commanders from hidden positions, and Lily would keep the wounded alive long enough to keep fighting. When dawn came, the air was cold and heavy. The enemy advanced toward the valley, confident in their size and strength. The defenders fell back just as planned, drawing them deeper into the choke point. When the signal came, Jack roared and charged, his blade cutting through the front lines. Soldiers followed, their courage fueled by his fearlessness. From the ridges, Ethan's rifle cracked again and again. Enemy officers dropped where they stood, their commands dying in their throats. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Claire moved along the line, directing the defenders to press forward to cut off any chance of retreat. The fighting was fierce. The valley floor turned slick with mud and blood. Arrows fell, swords clashed, and shields splintered. Lily worked without pause, dragging the wounded to safety, binding wounds in the freezing air. Her hands were steady even when the ground shook from the impact of battle. Queen Margaret stood at the rear, her voice carrying over the clash of steel. She commanded reserves to reinforce weak points, never losing sight of the fight. The soldiers fought harder, knowing their queen was watching. Hours passed before the enemy began to break. Jack's relentless assault shattered their front lines. Ethan's shots cut down their leaders, leaving them directionless. Claire's strategy closed the valley's exits, trapping them in a storm of steel. When the retreat finally came, it was chaos. The enemy fled into the hills, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The defenders did not give chase. They stood among the fallen, breathing hard, their armor dented and stained, but their city safe. The people of Ralford poured from the gates to meet them. Cheers rose into the air, though some still looked at the Earth Warriors with a mix of respect and unease. Queen Margaret walked among her soldiers, speaking to them, thanking them. When she reached Jack, Claire, Ethan, and Lily, she nodded once. No words were needed. That night, the city burned great bonfires in celebration. The warriors sat together in the shadows, away from the noise. They did not join in the songs or the dances. Their work was not finished. The enemy had been beaten, but not destroyed. In the distance, the hills lay dark and silent. The Earth Warriors knew the silence would not last. They had been sent here for a reason, and until that reason was gone, they would remain ready. The victory in the valley gave Ralford breathing room, but everyone knew it was not the end. The enemy still held ground in the hills, gathering strength. Scouts reported new camps, and fresh fighters arriving each night. The Earth Warriors did not wait for the attack to come. They planned to strike first. At dawn, Queen Margaret met with the king and his council. The plan was bold and dangerous. It would take a small force into the hills, strike the heart of the enemy camp, and end the war before it could drag on for months. The council hesitated, fearing the risk, but Margaret did not waver. She trusted her warriors. Jack, Claire, Ethan, and Lily prepared without a word. Their armor was repaired, their weapons sharp. The soldiers chosen to go with them were the toughest in Ralford. There was no music, no speeches, only the quiet sound of boots on stone as they marched out of the city. The hills were cold and quiet. The wind carried the smell of smoke from the enemy fires. Jack led the way, moving like a hunter through the trees. Claire studied every ridge and path, always looking for the best ground to fight on. Ethan ranged ahead, his eyes sharp, his rifle ready. Lily stayed in the center, close to the soldiers she would have to keep alive. By nightfall, they saw the glow of the enemy camp. Hundreds of fighters moved between the fires. The sound of their voices carried through the dark. Claire gathered the group and laid out the attack. They would strike from two sides, with Jack leading the main assault to break the lines, while Ethan took high ground to target commanders. Claire would direct the soldiers through the chaos, and Lily would work in the shadows, keeping the wounded from falling. When the signal came, Jack burst from the trees with a roar. His sword rose and fell, cutting a path through the startled enemy. Soldiers from Ralford charged behind him, their battle cries echoing through the hills. Arrows hissed through the air, and the clash of steel filled the night. From a rocky outcrop, Ethan fired, shot after shot, each one finding its mark. Enemy leaders fell, their shouts silenced. Confusion spread through their ranks. Claire moved among the fighters, her voice sharp, keeping the attack focused and relentless. Lily was everywhere at once, dragging men out of the mud, pressing cloth to bleeding wounds, forcing them back into the fight when they could still stand. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but her hands never shook. The enemy fought hard, but without their leaders, their lines began to break. Jack pressed forward, every strike sending men sprawling. Ethan's fire never slowed. Claire's commands kept the pressure on. The Ralford soldiers fought with a strength they had never known before. By midnight, the camp was in ruins. Fires burned low, and the enemy survivors were fleeing into the dark hills. The Earth warriors stood among the wreckage, their chests heaving, their armor dented and stained. The war was over. When they returned to Ralford, the gates were thrown open in celebration. The people cheered, their voices carrying through the streets. Queen Margaret rode at the head of the column, her face calm but her eyes proud. Jack walked beside her horse, his massive frame towering over the crowd. Claire carried a torn enemy banner, a sign of the victory. Ethan moved quietly, avoiding the attention, while Lily smiled faintly at the sight of the city safe once more. That night, the city feasted. Fires burned in the squares and music filled the air. The Earth warriors stayed together at the edge of the celebration. They spoke little, knowing words were not needed. They had done what they came to do. Queen Margaret stood before the people and the soldiers. Her voice was clear and strong. She told them that Ralford had asked for heroes, but heroes were not what the war required. It had required those willing to fight in the dark, to be harder than the enemy, to win no matter the cost. The crowd cheered, the sound rolling through the night. The Earth warriors knew they would leave soon, returning to their own land. But they also knew the people of Ralford would never forget them. When Earth was called, it had not sent gentle champions. It had sent its beasts, and the world would remember what they had done.